Great. Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to or welcome back to Decolonizing Justice, our week-long gathering focusing on advancing community-grown justice solutions. I'm Liz Keith. I'm the program director with Pro Bono Net, and my preferred pronouns are she and hers. And it's delighted to see a number of familiar names in our participant list here today, as well as some new people joining us for the first time. I'm just going to give a brief context to the gathering this week and our theme today for those of you that are joining for the first time, and then go through a couple of housekeeping logistics, and then we'll open our panel. So this event this week has been designed through a collaborative effort of Pro Bono Net, Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico, Alaska Legal Services, and the Open Society Justice Initiative, along with more than 30 organizations that are working on legal empowerment and community-based justice issues. And we're truly grateful for the support of the groups joining us as speakers and experts this week, including those that you'll hear from today. Each day we are exploring a different theme, and today's theme is centered on design and technology strategies to advance community-centered justice. And our panel discussion taking place in this session will build on an incredible keynote we had earlier today from Antoinette Carroll called Living Justice, talking about her work designing and redesigning justice systems and community-based justice strategies through the Creative Reaction Lab. This afternoon, or in our session here, we will hear from leading advocates, designers, and digital strategists that are working with communities to create tools that not only help people access and navigate our justice system as is, but that also help communities understand and shape the laws and policies that impact them. We really want to hear from all of you participating here today, so please do use the Q&A box in Zoom to ask questions, or the chat box to share your remarks or observations. We also encourage and invite you to continue the conversation and connect with each other through the event Slack space, and to amplify what's resonating with you on social media. My colleagues at Pro Bono Net are also helping to take notes live for those that find that helpful for following along. And then we also will be sharing key resources through a guide, an in-progress guide on Pro Bono Net's website. So, and if anybody has any questions or technical issues, accessibility needs, don't hesitate to reach out to our event facilitator, Jenny Rose Halprin, whose contact information we'll share. We are here to help if you're having any trouble participating today. So with that, I am delighted to turn it over to my colleague, Rodrigo Camarena, the director of the Immigration Advocates Network, to introduce our next session.
Great. Hi, everyone. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. And Liz, could you give me sharing ability? Awesome. Great. So thank you all for joining us today. We have a really phenomenal panel. I'm excited to introduce them to each and every one of you, although many of the panelists that you'll see today are already familiar, I'm sure. I'd like to start out by introducing, actually I'll stop the sharing, my colleague, Elizabeth Joynes Jordan. Elizabeth is the Deputy Legal Director at Make the Road New York. She helped, she helps lead the legal department, which prioritizes legal services delivery, strategic litigation, and legal support and organizing campaigns. Elizabeth was previously organizing and supervising attorney at the Workplace Justice Project legal team at Make the Road New York, representing workers and coordinating employment legal services. Prior to Make the Road, she was the Skadden Fellow and Associate Counsel at Latino Justice PRLDF, where she coordinated the Latinos at Work Law Project and litigated workers' rights cases on behalf of low-wage and immigrant workers. Elizabeth holds a JD from Fordham and the BA from University of Pennsylvania. So thank you and welcome, Elizabeth. Our next panelist is George Clement. George is co-founder of JustFix, a Brooklyn-based nonprofit that builds data-driven tools for tenants and organizers fighting displacement. By combining highly scalable SMS and mobile services with advanced housing data analysis, JustFix aims to build and galvanize a 21st century tenant movement. Previously, George was a fellow at Blue Ridge Labs at the Robin Hood Foundation and a product manager at General Assembly. He's a New Yorker with a BA in Sociology and African Studies from University of Wisconsin-Madison and has been selected as a Forbes 30 Under 30 in Law and Policy mention, as well as a World Economic Forum Global Shaper. So thank you, George, for being with us today.
Thank you.
George. And last but not least is David Rodriguez Andino. David is an attorney and coordinator of access to justice and tech programs at Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico. Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico is a nonprofit organization that provides free and accessible legal education and support to low and moderate income individuals and communities. At Ayuda Legal, David helps develop various technology products focused on empowering and accompanying adults and communities and bolstering the organization's advocacy efforts. Thank you, David, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Great. So we're gonna have a conversation, and I really want this to be a roundtable discussion. We'll pause at the end to ask questions of the audience, but I think all of the panelists with us today have had experience building digital legal tools, using them for organizing or plan to use them for organizing and advocacy efforts. And in all cases have employed co-design and participatory design strategies in developing the tools that they've created and developed for to advance their missions. But before we dig into that, I just want to give some context to their work. And I wanted to ask each of you to walk us through your work as of currently in this era that we're living in and how it's changed over these last few months. I know that, you know, the strategies that you've employed have changed, that the world itself has changed. And I'm curious how, if you could just introduce your work and tell us a little bit about how your work has shifted during the COVID-19 pandemic. And maybe we'll start with David.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I'll start. I'm sorry, I just didn't have my things set up yet. So as you said, I'm from Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico. Thank you all for having me here. We're super excited to be convening in this space with you all. And as I was saying to Liz before this meeting, it's always super empowering also to us to see others doing the type of work that you all are doing, and the similarities in the approaches and in what we are doing, even though we have different backgrounds, even though we're facing maybe different challenges. I noticed that we have like a very common goal, and just seeing Antoinette speak before us and seeing so many commonalities in what we're doing and what she's doing and what they're doing at Creative, it's super empowering. And I just wanted to point that out and just talk briefly about us since we have so many commonalities. I don't want to invest too much time talking about the organization, but we are, as you said, a nonprofit focused on providing free and accessible legal education. And we think that if legal education is socialized and we nurture aligned capacities, we can transform towards social change and social justice and systemic change, which is something that we have all in common. And in regards to the pandemic and what we're facing right now, I prepared some slides, but I'm not going to use them. But just give me a minute here just to have them, the numbers that I have here, to have them at hand. We started this work in 2015 by launching the first and the only right now statewide legal information website in Puerto Rico. That was done in collaboration with Pro Bono Net and Law Help Interactive. That I'd like to note something about that tool, since the whole subject of this week-long meeting is about decolonizing justice. I just like to point out that we were told by outsiders from Puerto Rico, by people that could have funded the initiative, that the people in Puerto Rico didn't need this. We supposedly didn't need a Know Your Rights website. And we went ahead, we forged strong collaborations with Pro Bono and Law Haven Interactive. We launched the website. Today, we are about to reach, at the end of the year, the website will have reached 1.9 million visitors. During the pandemic, that same tool that was thought, that was said by outsiders that wasn't needed, has enabled us, has allowed us to accompany people when they really needed it the most. When people needed answers during the pandemic and they didn't know where to go to, because as you all know, this happened in Puerto Rico, but this also happened in all the states. The infrastructure that the local labor departments had in place was not able to withstand the amount of people that went into unemployment all of a sudden because of the pandemic. So basically, you have the situation where every single web portal that people can use to access the unemployment benefits, and that's the only way to access them right now because of the pandemic, and there's social distancing and the offices were closed, we were on lockdown, they didn't work. The hotline didn't work. So people didn't know where to go to. And that tool that we have, ayudalegalpuertorico.org, enabled us to reach more than 500,000 people with information about their rights, what to do, and what they could do to access the benefits, and also know if their employers were violating their rights or not. Through we expanded the live chat support system that we have. Previously, we only had it 3 days per week, and during the pandemic, we expanded it. We hired more people, more lawyers, in order to be able to provide the service 5 days a week. And thanks to that, we were able to provide accompaniment to thousands of people during the pandemic. We created new content related to the pandemic, specifically unemployment, as I was saying. And I just want to make a small shout out to the team at PBN and LHI, because the website withstood the traffic, the heavy traffic that we've been receiving. Traffic has almost doubled during this year comparing to the last. It's around 70% more than last year. And contrary to the four websites that people were seeing when they visited the state agencies' websites, our website was up, and we were able to accompany people one-on-one in real time through the chat and through the information that we were sharing on the website. So that digital tool was instrumental and has been instrumental through the pandemic. That we have doubled down, as you can say, what we used to do before, which was creating new content related to what people are searching for. And since unemployment was the main thing that people were looking for, that's what we focused on. Right now, the content that we created for the pandemic is the most viewed during the last 5 years, which is super interesting to us, since it let us compare this disaster with previous disasters. Specifically speaking about the pandemic unemployment assistance, which is similar to the disaster unemployment assistance offered after Hurricane Maria and Irma. When you compare the page views of the pandemic unemployment assistance pages to those, it's not even a fair comparison. You have like 100 times more visitors to that content. So I just wanted to point that out, the importance of having that webpage on. The webpage that outsiders thought wasn't needed was instrumental to help thousands of people during the pandemic here in Puerto Rico.
I have a question about, that's amazing. And when you and I spoke earlier this week, I think you shared that your volume compared to this time last year, I think last year you had 1.3 million visitors. This time and at this point in the year, you're at 1.9 million, which is amazing. You know, a lot of organizations in our space talk about co-design and co-development, and I'm just wondering how Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico approaches the idea of how do you engage with the community that you're serving, and how does that influence your live chat and the tools that you design for people in need?
Yes, so co-design for us is super important, and we try to implement it as much as we can, depending on the tool that we are working on at the moment. For example, you could say that an aspect of co-design on live chat is us taking into considerations the questions that people have at the moment at certain moment in time, and creating new content based on those questions, or being able to notice where we are maybe faltering on how we are telling them the information, how we can fix it, how we can make it better. So that's like a very, very, very abstract way of talking about co-design. And then we have other projects which are way more focused on getting down to the ground and really meeting with the community or people that work with the community. I can give, for example, we have the document automation project at the organization, where we reach a memorandum of understanding and agreement with the judicial branch in the island, where we are creating automated forms for protection orders procedures. We started the project with the domestic violence protection order. And when we developed that tool, we didn't just take the form that they already have and turn it into a document, an automated document. We sat down with legal companions. Intercesoras legales is the term you see here in the island in Puerto Rico. These are persons that accompany individual survivors of domestic violence. We had meetings with many of them, and we incorporated their knowledge into building the tool, so that the tool will be akin to them talking with the survivor. And doing that enabled us to create an interview that not only has the purpose of filling out the document that the person needs to file, but the interview that we created in collaboration with the legal companions allowed us to accompany people during the process and empower them. I can give you a concrete example that in case, instead of asking someone if they have been restricted in their liberty, we ask them if the other person, if their partner has sometimes maybe prohibited them from wearing certain clothes. And we do that with each and every one of the questions. And it was very interesting for us and very empowering also for us when we did focus testing of the tool, that some participants that went through the interview process, they were able to identify for the first time that they were victims of violence too. They were survivors. So it is very important for us to always have that in mind whenever we embark on any of the tech projects, to try to as Antoinette was saying, the solution will come from the community. So as close as you can get to the community, the people that are living through this, the better, they will be the ones that will be designing the tool at the end.
Great, thank you so much, David. And you know, as someone that's followed your work and has seen Ayuda Legal deliver services not only post Maria but also during the pandemic, you're certainly very much grounded in your community, and I think it comes through in the tools that you create. Thanks, David. I wanted to turn to you, George, now. You know, I've also followed the work of JustFix for a long time, and I was hoping that you could tell us a little bit about what is JustFix. I know you have a suite of services and you're working on new things, but how has your work changed over time, and how do you implement and bring co-design to your work?
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. Yeah, I think, you know, our work, just to sort of give a broad overview to start, you know, we've similarly been around for about 4.5, 5 years now. And initially started very narrowly focused on supporting tenants who were dealing with repair and harassment issues, and helping them to present organized cases in housing court. But when we thought of our mission as a whole, it's much broader than that. And really, I think the organization as a whole is trying to bring technology and data to the tenants' rights movement in New York City and beyond, and therefore identify areas where we can be really helpful in building capacity, and also help to fill in some gaps where there's a lack of existing resources or services. So we have built a suite of different products in collaboration with the legal aid community, the tenant organizing community, and tenant leaders around the city. And it can help with everything from sending a letter of complaint to your landlord about repair issues, to suing your landlord in housing court for repair or harassment issues, to identifying if you're eligible for a free attorney in an eviction case through right to counsel, order your rent history from the state agency, and really trying to make all of these, what really have become complex bureaucratic processes, much simpler and more accessible. Co-design has been a really, really critical part from the very, very beginning. And I think one of the interesting developments is we obviously leaned a lot on convening people in person, on going out into the community, and having meetings and meeting tenants and being at workshops and tabling at events around the city. And so I think it's become difficult for us, as it has for lots of community-based organizations, in terms of how do you make those connections? How do you replicate all of that kind of outreach, right? Door knocking, like how do you replicate that type of thing during COVID? I think it is difficult, but I think you also have seen incredible adaptability and resiliency in finding alternative ways to do outreach, get the word out, and organize, even in this context. So I think we've plugged into a lot of existing programming and adaptations folks have made, in terms of, a lot of people are doing trainings via YouTube or Facebook Live, a lot of WhatsApp groups to help with organizing, that kind of thing. And so certainly part of it is being creative with how outreach is done. And from a co-design standpoint, we convene a group that we call the Design Advisory Council, which is a way that we've formalized our relationship with about half a dozen tenant-led organizing groups around New York, and bring that group together to inform our products. And as we're building new features or making decisions about iterations to make on our products, and so that group has now been convening over Zoom calls, sort of every other week on average. And so that has continued to be really critical. In terms of what the COVID context is in general, we obviously felt a real desire to help and a need to step up in mid-March. And as we were talking with tenants and talking with advocates in those first couple of weeks, there were two main buckets of issues that we heard. One was clearly, folks losing income, right? Being furloughed, being laid off. And very quickly that translates into, fear of missing rent, right? When you just think about, about a quarter of renters in New York are severely rent burdened, right? Paying more than 50% of their paycheck towards rent. So those income disruptions very quickly become missing rent payments, right? So that was a very acute feeling then. That is very much still front of mind now. The other area is, we work a lot with tenants who are dealing with serious repair or maintenance issues in their apartments. And now they were not able to leave those apartments. So you think about households with young children, with elderly folks, and there's cockroaches or lead paint or mold, these environmental hazards in your home that have really serious health repercussions. And you are being told by everybody, don't leave your home. So you don't even have that break during the day of being at school or at work. And there's a lot of health issues that result from having to stay indoors, actually, even as you're doing that as a public health precaution, right? And so a couple of the main projects that we've worked on over the course of the last 7 months or so. One was to actually adapt our system with New York City housing courts to enable tenants to create court filings to sue their landlords in housing court for repair and harassment issues. So with an eviction moratorium and the physical courthouses closed for the most part, tenants were able to still file emergency repair and harassment cases in housing court using JustFix. So they're able to go to JustFix, create the filings, e-sign them, and file them all from their phone, tablet, computer, all from home in about 15 minutes or so, instead of having to go to a physical court and present forms to a clerk, that kind of thing. So there have been over 1,200 or 1,300 cases filed and accepted over the course of COVID through that system. And then we've also done some work. We're starting to do work with a partner in Los Angeles called Sage. And so there's been work supporting in other areas as well. But I think my perspective right now, and it's hard because we're still very much in the midst of this crisis, is it has been incredible to see how resilient folks have been, but also we are not at all out of the woods yet. And I think I'm really concerned with the status of eviction moratorium policies around the country and on the federal level right now. So we need to keep pushing there, and there's been incredible organizing happening by folks like Make the Road around pushing the governor in New York, governors around the country, because there's only so much we can do as technologists or as advocates when I think there are really significant stimulus and policy answers that need to be provided as well.
Great. Thank you so much, George. Elizabeth, I know, we are working together on a tool to combat wage theft, but I was hoping that you could tell us a little bit about Make the Roads Work. You bring in co-design and collaboration in different ways. I think for me, Make the Road is, and your member model is sort of really iconic and is visible in a lot of the campaigns that you lead. And I was hoping, Elizabeth, if you could tell us a little bit about Make the Roads Work, how the members' voices guide that work, and how your work has changed during the pandemic, specifically around the issue of tackling wage theft and working on other worker issues.
Sure, thank you. And I'm so glad to be here today with you all. And I think listening to David and George, a lot of the same themes have emerged over the last, I guess now, 8 months. since the pandemic started. But for those of you who may not know Make the Road New York is a membership-based community organization. We now have more than 24,000 members across New York. And we aim to build the power of immigrant and working class communities to achieve dignity and justice. And it really is our members that identify the problems and challenges that are most important to tackle in their lives, and then together design solutions and fight for those changes. So our membership is intimately involved in the design of all of our work. We blend community organizing and direct service provision to educate and build collective power. Our legal department has 3 core teams, including housing and benefits, immigration, and workplace justice. And I can say that since the pandemic, we, like other organizations across New York City, had to close our doors in March. Make the Road has forever been really based in community centers where people come for classes, they come to share meals, they come for legal intakes, they come, we are committee based. So every evening during the week, we have issue-based committees that meet with an organizer. One of those is workplace justice, but we also have civil rights and immigration, housing, youth power, a parents committee, a TGNCIQ committee. So we have these issue-based spaces where people come together to learn and to share and to think about what the solutions they need are. So to have our offices closed was really strange and scary. And I think it was a huge loss for our community together. However, we, quickly pivoted and moved everything online. So I think we've learned a lot since March. We continued to hold meetings online. We continued legal intakes and to take new cases. I think as David and George mentioned too, we also saw the number of calls to Make the Road, at least to really doubling. As this pandemic hit, it hit our communities so hard. It hit it in so many ways. We have, I think now around 70 members who passed away due to COVID. Many, many more whose family members passed away or were very ill. As you know, Queens was one of the epicenters in New York early on, and that is where one of our largest community centers and membership bases is. And our members, many of them were working in low wage industries, and so either immediately lost their jobs without much savings, or they were essential workers. We have a lot of members who are in delivery work or commercial cleaning work and construction. So, or they were being asked to show up to work as essential workers without the proper protective equipment in dangerous situations. We had a lot of domestic workers who were in really trying to figure out what to do when they were being asked to go to, private homes in really closed spaces. I think George already talked about the housing issues these same people were facing. I would say in the beginning, many of the calls we were getting were about where people were going to get food. And, we've just seen kind of the inequities that existed before COVID just exploded and were just so visible as the pandemic hit. So we did, everything we could to bring all of Make the Roads many services and some new services online. Although our community centers are closed, we did start a food distribution program. Some of that was using mutual aid models, and we have like amazing volunteers sign up to deliver, and worked with our delivery worker members to help organize that. And all of this was really designed based on the needs that we were hearing. I mean, because we serve so many people in so many different service areas, we really have a sense pretty quickly of what's happening on the ground and what the kind of most acute issues are. So, our colleagues here have talked about getting out know your rights information, especially when the government was passing new laws all the time. We were in phase 1, then phase 2. What does that mean? Do I have to go to work? Many of our members are Spanish speakers, so we really quickly tried to learn the laws and then translate things, laws that were kind of drafted so fast that there were so many problems with them. But try to understand those laws and then translate them into materials and information that would be helpful to people, like creating frequently asked questions based on the hundreds of calls we were getting from people about, oh, do I qualify for unemployment insurance? The PUA that David was talking about earlier. So our work since COVID, I would say we've done a lot more. We've devoted a lot more staff time and resources to putting together Know Your Rights material. We did also, Make the Roads legal team has long, visited those committees I spoke about earlier to do Know Your Rights presentations on all of the areas in which we work. And so we also started doing Facebook Live webinars, which has, been kind of incredible, because usually at a committee meeting, we have, 30 to 60 members in the room, and we know them all, and it's a beautiful setting. But through the Facebook Live, we have been able to reach so many people. And we've seen that during the live sessions, we have several hundred viewers often, but then a week later, you can see that thousands of people have watched them. So that has been, that has helped us increase our reach in a new way. And I hope that that is something that we will continue to also do when we go back to work, to our offices. And I also would just wanted to highlight that I think I think it's been really incredible how all these organizations have been able to use technology to stay connected to our base and our membership, and to try as best we can to, to continue doing all the work. But I think, again, we've seen different challenges and really the iniquities highlighted again, even things coming up, we're trying to have private conversations with clients who, may not have a private space in their home. Not all of our clients have, continuous access to Wi-Fi. I'm working on a couple group cases now. And traditionally we have group meetings and we're doing group decision making. When you try to do that on Zoom, and half of the people don't have, can't get the Zoom app on their phone, and you have some people on the phone, it's been really challenging. And I think, we're trying to be flexible and figure out workarounds, but it has also kind of brought up new challenges. Yeah, I hope that answered your questions.
Yeah, no, I think it reflects experience of many groups, and I have seen Make the Road just embrace, digital tools in a way that I hadn't seen before. Your work is so, grassroots and on the ground. And I remember in the early days of the pandemic, the live webinars that you did were really, really helpful. I want to just encourage people to keep asking questions using the Q&A box, and we will refer them to our panelists in a couple of minutes. Elizabeth, just staying on you, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about Reclamo, the project that we're working on together, and specifically how this tool will help make the road and your organizing efforts, and especially around advocacy and the use of data. Maybe for just a quick minute.
Sure. So Reclamo, we are developing in partnership with Rodrigo's organization, the Immigration Advocates Network. Reclamo is a tool, it's an app that we envision would be used mostly by non-lawyer advocates to help workers recover stolen wages. So the app would screen people for wage theft and then take them through an interview and create a demand letter that they could send to their former or the violating employer, and then populate a complaint form for the Department of Labor. Wage theft this has been an issue that Make the Road has been working on for decades now. It is still epidemic in New York and across our country. And immigrants are twice as likely to be victims of wage theft, in part because of knowledge of their legal rights, but also because of fear of retaliation, especially around immigration status. So Reclamo is, it does several things. It's a know your rights tool. We have learned on the legal team after, screening. So I would say most of the legal cases that we see in the workplace justice team are wage theft cases. And so we've learned a lot about how to get information from workers about their experiences, and we tried to put that in the app. So use all of the kind of knowledge and tricks that we've developed by interviewing thousands of workers over the years into like an intuitive tool that anyone can use, because you don't need to be a lawyer to do that interview. And so we are hoping that this would make it would enable more people to engage on this issue. So the tool itself provides a lot of know your rights information during the interview, and then we hope, a wage recovery tool. So the technology would facilitate, expedite, and then we hope scale the work that we are doing already at Make the Road, that our organizers are doing, advocates, staff attorneys, paralegals, and even some of our member leaders trying to get, envisioning that they would be able to use this with other members. So how would it connect to our organizing? It would provide really valuable data, and that is one piece. Like, where are the biggest violations? Which are the worst industries? Are there geographies where people are particularly kind of vulnerable to exploitation? And that will show us where the enforcement is failing the most, and where we need to kind of direct our attention in terms of trying to figure out possible solutions. Our day-to-day work teach us how the laws are working or not working on the ground, and that is where Make the Road has also been involved, using that experience and then trying to draft laws to fix the problem, or tweak laws to try to make them more enforceable. So we think that, the more people who are using this tool across the state would provide a tremendous amount of data about like where the enforcement kinks are. And also, I think, we envision that the tool would be used by advocates to engage workers on wage theft, but then also get them involved in not only the fight against wage theft more broadly, but on other issues that communities are organizing around.
Great, thank you. Super exciting and excited for the tool to come live next year. George, turning to you, your suite of products and services have been just widely adopted by the housing advocate community. I know a lot of organizers that are handing out, lit with JustFix's website on it. And I'm just curious or hoping that you could tell us a little bit more about how the data and the how your tools have helped inform advocacy. I know that you played a role in helping strengthen the rent laws when they were up for renewal last year. So could you share a little bit more about JustFix's role in advocacy and organizing on the ground?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think with this audience, it's such an interesting question always, right? This sort of, direct service and individual actions and impact, and how you also leverage that, utilize that, bring people into organizing efforts that will have more systemic change, right? And so I think it's always something that we've really thought about, as well as, technology generally can be helpful with helping navigate like an individual process, right? And make that particular process more efficient. And certainly that's something that is a, an ongoing challenge for us, is how do we have that element of our work, but then also think about how do we assist organizing work that is more geared toward systemic change. So we built a site called Who Owns What about 2.5 years ago, that was after hearing for a while tenant leaders and organizers and lawyers asking this sort of set of questions around, we're working in one building, or we've identified one building or a cluster of buildings that have a particularly bad landlord, but it's hard to find all of the other buildings across the city that they own or are associated with. And it was historically really hard because every building is sort of its own LLC oftentimes. And so, a lot of people pay rent to, 10 Main Street LLC, which, is a business that only owns that one building. And so we used largely a lot of open data, but really we're replicating sort of investigative strategies that organizers and tenants and lawyers had been using for many years. And we were able to apply those strategies across, data sets for every building in the city, and are able to now map out on Who Owns What those complete corporate portfolios. So you can sort of think of it as going from one building to a couple levels up and seeing the whole sort of ecosystem of corporate ownership of these buildings. And so, it's a little bit of like a piercing the corporate veil kind of thing. So Who Owns What has been used quite frequently over the past few years. But we saw, so I guess two sort of use cases. So one is last summer, rent regulations for New York State were up for renewal, and there was a lot of organizing happening to eliminate a lot of the loopholes that landlords were using to evict tenants, displace tenants, raise rents. And one of the big arguments that the landlord lobby had was essentially, you are putting these really difficult policies in place, and it's hurting small landlords, these small business owners, mom and pop landlords, as they call them. And that is a very sympathetic picture to paint. And so the Housing Justice for All Coalition asked, does the data actually show that that is who owns most buildings? And so because we were able to do this portfolio mapping, we're able to look at a distribution of buildings across size of portfolio, and saw that contrary to this argument that the landlord lobby was making, most buildings are part of quite large portfolios, right? So you can think of it as like 10 or more buildings owned by the same entity. And this was especially true in buildings that were rent regulated and would be were therefore relevant for these laws that were up for renewal. And so the normal story, the average story for those buildings was actually that they're part of very large corporations and not mom and pop kind of ownership. And so we put together a report, and some of these data points were used as talking points for advocacy, and obviously it ended up being quite a successful advocacy campaign led by Housing Justice for All and a lot of organizing groups. And part of it is being able to debunk this sort of myth of mom and pop landlords that they were trying to push. And another use case that we saw around COVID was that there was a lot of interest in coordinating rent strikes, especially right at the beginning. So in March and April, and people were coming to Who Owns What to identify other buildings that were owned by the same company, where tenants could reach out to tenants in those other buildings in the portfolio and coordinate rent strikes across multiple buildings, and being able to therefore build more collective power and leverage as you're going into an action like that. So another really interesting way that we're just sort of providing this information and making it less opaque, and then people are going to use it and take all of these really creative actions. So some really interesting use cases that came from us sort of being able to analyze and visualize a lot of open data in interesting ways.
Great, thanks so much for sharing. David,
Rodrigo, can I interject here a little bit?
Go for it. Yeah, please. And I have a question for you too.
Okay, I just wanted to say that emphasize the fact that we can see like a common thread on Make the Road, JustFix, and the work that we're doing, and the work that I'm sure a lot of people tuning in are also doing, which is that the tech tool in itself is not the endpoint. It's just the beginning of the journey, and we must coalesce the tech tool with other efforts, other advocacy efforts, empowerment efforts, in order to really drive the systemic change that we want. Because if we have to avoid just creating the tool, because just creating the tool and delivering the tool will just make the system that we have right now a little easier to bear for the people and the institutions. And that's not what we want. We want to change the system. We don't want to make the system easier and faster. That's something that we're doing with the tools that we have, but we are bolstering the tool with all the other efforts. And all that co-align is what really allows to create the systemic change that we're looking for. So I just wanted to point that out.
No, absolutely. And I was actually hoping you could talk to us about the systemic change that Ayuda Legal has contributed to. I've had the opportunity to visit you a few times, and I know that you play a big role in advocating for just recovery post-Maria. And I'm wondering, how are you using the tools that you've developed now to continue to drive that systemic change? Can you tell us a little bit about some of that work?
Yeah, sure. I want to also say that, as Antoinette was saying, the kind of systemic change that we really want, the one that we're aiming for, we won't see it possibly in our lifetimes. So when I speak about when I answer your question now, I just want to make clear that obviously we haven't reached that systemic change that we're really looking for, since what we're working on at the moment are just steps towards having the community create the systemic change down the road, and the road will be long. We're making the road, as as Elizabeth's organization said its name. So we have been able to have victories along that road, sorry, such as, for example, being able to have FEMA admit that they were treating us differently by requiring people in Puerto Rico to have perfect title and proof ownership through a perfect title, which is not a requirement in any other place in order to reach the short-term assistance that FEMA provides after a disaster. So we were able to, through advocacy efforts, to have them admit that we needed a sworn statement, and they started to, and also I must say that we had help from all the other collaborators, BBN here and LHI too, such that people were able to avoid having to search for their perfect title, and through a sworn statement, they were able to reach the assistance that they had a right to receive. So that's, and also through the Just Recovery program, we've been able to coalesce a coalition of communities and individuals that are working towards just recovery. Also, to add to what Antoinette was saying, we define just recovery as the community defined it in a co-creation process, where they define just recovery as the people having the right to a recovery process that responds to their needs, wants, and human rights. That definition was, as I said, co-created with the community hand in hand. And through the work that we have been doing on the Just Recovery program, we have been able to take what was before maybe very complex legal language related to the whole long-term recovery process. CDBDR has become almost common parlance in the island, and that's thanks to the work that we've been doing along with other organizations here in the island. And am I answering your question, or am I deviating a little bit here?
No, you're answering it.
Okay, so technology has really enabled us to highlight people's rights during the recovery process, and has also allowed us to denounce the instances where the government has violated such rights. And that coalition of communities and individuals right now are working towards that, and are meeting constantly, whether it be on physically when we could do that, or now through online methods. And we keep talking about it, and we keep denouncing not only us, but the people also are denouncing the atrocities committed by our government and the federal government regarding the long-term recovery process, which, as you know, we still haven't even, you could say that we haven't even begun really to recover from the hurricanes, even though it's been now 3 years, more than 3 years at the moment.
Yeah. Thanks, David. I feel like that's really unfortunate to hear, just as someone that has been following it, and I know you live it. So thank you for sharing, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing down there. We have a few minutes left, and I wanted to answer some of our colleagues' questions. And if you haven't asked a question yet, feel free to put it into the Q&A and we'll get to it. And so we have a question from Jim McQueen for Elizabeth. And Jim wants to know a little bit more about those decision-making conversations and negotiations with your members over Zoom. I think that was Jim's question. If you can say a little bit more about that and what that looks like, maybe briefly, so we can get to other questions.
Sure. Yeah, it's been hard. I think, Jim, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, your question is regarding what I mentioned about working on like group representation, um, group wage theft cases or other employment issue cases. I guess it's been really tricky and hard. And I think, you know, luckily with the groups that we are working with now, we did like start these cases before the pandemic. So we have built trust, you know, with the groups. We do have some cases that are new. So I think like building client trust over Zoom, and it's different, it's hard. And I think we've struggled a lot with the privacy issue. We have in some cases like gotten permission from our offices to meet with members 6 feet away in masks when we're prepping for hearings or interviews, because sometimes it really isn't adequate enough, especially when you're, you know, talking to members about really traumatic experiences. So I guess I would say we are doing the best we can, and, you know, using all of the tools and strategies we have, in terms of like group facilitation and, you know, yeah, trying to build trust, but it has been really hard.
Great. And actually staying on you, Elizabeth, we have Sarah Southey asking if other orgs will be able to use Reclamo, or is it specific to Make the Road?
Yes, other orgs. It is really being designed in the hopes that it can be widely shared. I think our pilot tool will be limited to, or it kind of will be designed for New York State based on the laws here. But our hope is that one day we will have Reclamo in many states, and many partner organizations. So if I forget where you said you were based, but please reach out after, because, you know, we are hoping there will be many phases in this project, and we would love partner orgs to work with around the country and other, you know, other places.
Great, good to hear. And then this is a general question, and anyone can feel free to discuss this, but this is from Douglas Lachlan. He's asking if your communities have been asking for A to J tools to help address educational supports and early intervention for, I think, young people who might be on a school to prison pipeline. So I think this is an early educational and support intervention for a young person who maybe might be, vulnerable to incarceration or a system that oppresses and incarcerates people from that community. So, Douglas, is that your question? Has anyone that thought about early intervention tech, educational tech? I don't know if maybe in this context or another context. And if not, we can maybe skip it and move on. I just had one final question, and Douglas, we'll try to follow up with you and maybe connect you to others that might have that same need. Just in closing, I'm wondering, and thank you all so much for making the time. I know you're probably, especially if you're a parent in New York, you just heard that school has been closed and you're juggling a lot. But I wanted to ask each of you to briefly share, what is one thing that you are excited about and that you're working on currently, and that you want to just get others to look out for in the next year or so. And maybe we'll start with you, George.
Sure. So I guess there's a couple of things that we'll be working on, and certainly for folks that are interested in collaborating, in being involved in the design process, that kind of thing. Certainly reach out. I can put my email in the chat. I think one is something we're very much sort of gearing up for right now is as sort of eviction moratorium policies change, thinking about how we get the most accurate and up-to-date information out to people as quickly as possible. I think it's everyone's natural instinct when you have a question to go to Google and to ask that question, right? Or to go to the folks or the institutions in your community that you're connected with. And so I think we all, are playing a role in helping to interpret and vet this complex information and make it, language accessible, make it technically accessible to folks. And so we're certainly thinking about how we can do that in terms of evolving. We run a site called Eviction.nyc with the Right to Counsel Coalition in New York. So that's certainly something that's being discussed right now. And then we're also thinking about sort of the next stage of who owns what and what comes next there, and supporting similar projects around the country that are sprouting up. There is an enormous, multi-billion-dollar property tech industry on the other side of this issue, and I think the communities that we serve oftentimes look at technology and the sort of tech sector with apprehension or distrust, and I think that's like well earned by the sector. And so I think it's really interesting and great to hear sort of these examples of technology being used to actually be supportive and additive and not extractive. And so as we continue to build upon who owns what in our additional services, also, just underlining how much trust is involved in the successful sort of development and distribution of these kinds of tools. So excited to continue to build on that, and excited for this sort of sector in general to continue to gain steam.
Great, thanks so much, George. And I think you're absolutely right, and we tend to forget that as organizers and people in the space that there's our opponents or the folks that want to maintain the status quo are investing in these tools, or investing in maintaining the status quo, or at least working against the efforts that we're trying to advance. So it's a good reminder. And we certainly face a lot of roadblocks in the immigrant legal tech space when we try to bring technology to partners, and that's a nice reminder. David, can you maybe just tell us a little bit about what are you looking forward to in the year to come? What interesting, what questions are you looking at? How are you hoping to employ what you've built to advance the just recovery work that you're doing there?
Yeah, in terms of projects, I'd like to highlight one project which we are doing in collaboration with Puerto, which is a tool that will enable people here in Puerto Rico to assess the risk level regarding foreclosure, or foreclosure risk level, and connect them with legal service providers that could better help them with their specific issues. So we're close to the launch of that tool. You were part of the co-design process in March, and also Liz. And so we're excited about that. We're excited about many things since we have a lot of projects running at the same time. But I'd like to highlight that one because it's the one that is nearest its launch. And Also, I'd like to say that next year we're going to be working more on tenants' rights. So we'll possibly touch base with George. And also, I wanted to congratulate both Make the Road and Elizabeth and George and you too, Rodrigo, specifically because the work that you guys are doing is great. And I think the tools that you have developed, whether it be in me or the things of Reclamo and JustFix are awesome. I think it's great that JustFix is open source, the platform, if I'm not mistaken, it's all on GitHub. And that's great that you've done that. And that goes in hand with what I was saying before about just not developing the tool, but making sure that there's something around it. And that enables other organizations to also build their own tools if they have the know-how. So that's awesome. I love open source projects. And if I knew how to program, I would be going crazy over there at GitHub, but I went to the wiki and I read it and I think it's great, but I can't program. I'm trying to learn though. So that's also something I'm looking forward to. I'm taking Python classes by myself. So maybe possibly in the future, I could understand better what JustFix has done and apply it to other projects that we have.
Great, it's exciting. And yeah, we should just fix Puerto Rico. Let's make that happen.
Make it happen.
Elizabeth, and do you want to close us out? What's something that you're looking forward to? What are you working on? I know Make the Road is like, oh my goodness, every time I turn on the radio, it's like some litigation that you've won or a lawsuit that was successful. But what are you excited about? It can be related to the work that we're doing together, but not necessarily. What comes to mind?
Yeah, well, thank you, Rodrigo. I think what I would like to share with you all and share the invitation for those of you who are in New York. I would say our priority fight right now is getting Governor Cuomo to fund excluded workers. And that means that all of the federal relief that they passed at the beginning of the pandemic, which I think, as we can all agree, was insufficient, but it excluded many, and I would say most of our membership. It deliberately excluded a lot of immigrants. And so we are demanding that Governor Cuomo create a fund that would create income replacement like unemployment, but make it available to those people who were excluded in the first place. And it would be a flat rate monthly cash payment direct to families at this moment when we really need it most. And we're calling on New York to tax billionaires in order to pay for this. So I would invite you all. I'm going to put in the chat information, but I would say one of the kind of highlights during COVID for me has been seeing the beautiful actions that our organizers and members have organized during the pandemic in the streets. It started out as caravans, and everyone is wearing masks, but they are outside, and there is an action coming up next Tuesday, November 24th. It will be music, street theater, speaking program, but I would invite you all to come to demand that Cuomo pass this really direly needed relief. And I would just say, picking up on what George and David said, there are huge powers behind all of this exploitation. And, at Make the Road, we are trying to create model policies in places like New York City and New York State where we can push the laws and push better strategies, and then trying to build national momentum in other states where Make the Road is, in battleground states like Nevada and Pennsylvania. But, actors like Amazon, who are, creating monopolies like that, their policies are influencing all of the labor exploitation that we see down the chain. They're lowering standards, and they are breaking the rules. They're making their own rules. So we are trying to take on those big fights too, using many different strategies.
It's amazing. I'm so honored to be amongst such incredible people doing such beautiful work. But thank you all for joining, and give yourselves and everyone online a little round of applause, or a little wave. And Liz, I'll throw it back to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth and David and George, for joining us this afternoon, and Rodrigo for convening this conversation. We deeply appreciate having your voices and experience here today, and all of the ways in which we learn from your work and practices well beyond this gathering as well, in areas like community-centered design, connecting individual casework to advocacy, and also challenging the narrative about where knowledge of the law does and should lie, and how people engage with the law. So we will adjourn for 15 minutes, and then our last session today will be an interactive workshop led by Katie Lamb from Pro Bono Net and Eric Vang from Alaska Legal Services, that will walk through concrete examples of co-design activities and methods that you can readily adapt in your own programs and communities. I'm really excited about this workshop. I saw a preview of it last week, and Eric and Katie have done a terrific job designing it. So we look forward to seeing many of you back here in about 10 minutes on this same Zoom.